Okay, so let's take a look at this story. And again, we're going to focus on the meaning first and then identify the use of grammar. Okay, so here's kind of like an example of what we saw on Wednesday. And actually, this is pretty much our thesis statement of our story. Cuando tenía 16 años, yo recibí mi licencia de conducir. So why is this basically the thesis statement or a very nice introductory statement to this story? What's this sentence talking about? You don't need to translate it literally, word for word, but basically here I'm stating what? Right, exactly. I was 16 when I got my license. Okay, so meaning first. Now let's focus on the uses of the grammar. We've got two verbs here, tenía and recibí. Tenía is in the preterite or the imperfect? It's in the imperfect, muy bien, because remember imperfect verbs besides the irregulars are aba and ia. And then recibí is preterite. Muy bien, excelente. Okay, so let's talk about why recibí is in the preterite first. We identified that this means when I got my driver's license. So why would that be the preterite? I received, I got. Specific, one time. You can either get it or you don't. That's like a one-time action completed in the past. So that makes sense why this would be preterite. So why is tenía in the imperfect? What am I talking about here? How am I using tenía? What am I saying? I was 16, which is pretty specific. And actually, tenía, although when we're talking about age and that seems very specific, this would be an exception to the rule. So today I'm going to outline very black and white uses of the preterite and imperfect. So when you're doing your superside homework, and furthermore on the test and the final exam, and on the ampliación when you either have to choose or apply, it'll be very clear when do I use the imperfect, when do I use the preterite. And in this particular example, whenever you're expressing the age of yourself or anyone else, you're going to use tener, tenía, and the imperfect. And that's just a rule. So we're going to make a little acronym down here. So I want at the bottom of your notes, or the graph on the other side of that table, age, and then record. Tenía 16 años, the example from the story. Tenía. So what's your context clue? When you're given on the, años, exactly, on the super site or on the test. Or when you apply this concept on the ampliación, if you see an age with años and it's a verb tener, your answer is what? Tenía, 100% of the time. So this is an exception to the rule. Even though it seems specific, it's just a rule. Okay. Otro ejemplo. Durante toda mi adolescencia, quería conducir. What's this statement? What idea is being conveyed here? What am I talking about? Always what? Wanting to drive. Right. When? Throughout my adolescence. Right. And we can all relate to this. This is an ongoing desire. Wanting, needing, necesitaba, quería. It's an ongoing action, a continuous action, and therefore this verb is in what tense? Imperfect. Muy bien. Okay? Furthermore, querer in the preterite we learned in chapter 9 completely changes its meaning in the preterite. It either means to try to do something, like quise dormir, or to refuse to do something. No quiso comer. So it changes its meaning completely in the preterite. It doesn't have anything to do with wanting. So when we want to express wanting in the past, we're going to use the imperfect. Okay? Also, toda mi adolescencia is referring to this huge span of time where action is ongoing. Otro ejemplo. Yo practicaba manejar todos los días What's this saying? Practice, right? Exactly. Practice what? Driving. So, I'm giving background information, and the way I'm using this verb, is that indicating just one time I practice, or repeatedly I would practice? Repeatedly, right? We know the context of this story is getting your driver's license, and most of us can assume or conclude, oh, this would definitely be a repeated action, therefore, what tense is being used? The Abba is imperfect, right, exactly. Ongoing, repeated, habitual actions. Otro ejemplo. So now I'm kind of getting into the body of my paragraph. Antes de tomar el examen, yo estaba lista y un poco nerviosa. Lista, nerviosa. What am I describing here? Emotions, right, exactly. I'm describing emotions, talking about how I felt. Therefore, what tense am I using? The imperfect. Here's another rule or use of the imperfect that we can put on our notes. On the other side, under imperfect, above age, we're going to want to write the word emotions. How you feel and where you are, always use the verb estar. So emotions typically are used with estar. Estaba lista y un poco nerviosa. So our context clues here with the verb estar, if we see what? We know it's the imperfect most of the time. If we see what? After estar? What's nerviosa? What's lista? These are what? Emotions, feelings. If we see the verb estar, we're probably going to use the imperfect. Okay, and in looking at this story, there's one more example I want to get to first before I talk about that. So hold that thought. Because our next example, hacía sol, no llovía, era un día bonito, tiempo perfecto para conducir, is talking about what? In general, I'm doing what here? Describing. And in this particular example, I'm describing what? What's hacía sol, no llovía? Right, I'm describing the weather. The weather. So here's another use. Two uses, actually. There's two things going on here. We have a description and the weather. So we're going to include weather here on our list. Hacía sol. So we can conclude if we're given the verb hacer with like sol, frío, viento, lluvia, nieve, calor, and we are given the verb hacer, our answer will probably be what? Hacía, imperfecto, no? And then we're also describing here. It makes sense that we would use imperfect with descriptions. Remember in class on Wednesday, we were like, ¿Cómo era tu primer carro? We're describing our first car. That is totally ongoing. That is not an action completed in the past. A description, most of the time, is in the imperfect, so we would use era un día bonito. So when we see ser plus adjectives, ser plus adjectives, we're probably going to use the imperfect. Era un día bonito. No? Most of the time. Nothing is really always except for the age thing. Just note to self. But most of the time, on the test, for sure, I'm not going to put, these obscure random, Spanish minor and major uses of the preterite and imperfect. It's going to assess a 201 level of the imperfect and preterite. So it's going to be very black and white. Okay, so before I move on to this particular example, I did want to point out that up until this point in our story, most of our verbs are in what tense? Preterite or imperfect? Tenía, quería, practicaba, estaba, llovía, hacía, era. What tense do we see a lot of? In the imperfect. So we can conclude in an introduction of a story, a good storyteller in the introduction is going to give background information, descriptions, set the scene. And when you do that in Spanish, in the past tense, you're going to use a lot of the imperfect because of the descriptions. If you tell how somebody was feeling, all of this background information would be in the imperfect. And a good introduction does that. The reader or the listener needs some context first before you dive into the second part of a story, which is what? You have the intro, and then what? What's the second chunk of a good story? The body. And just looking at your paper, when you get into the body, although we see some of one tense, the majority of these verbs are conjugated in what tense? The preterite. Why? Because in the introduction, you give background information, you describe, set the scene. But in the body, what do? That's when you get to the details, the specific events, the climax of the story. And most of those actions are the one-time completed actions in the past. So in organizing a paragraph, which obviously is what you're going to do for your ampliación, you're going to write a paragraph, and I want you to keep this in mind. I want you to keep in mind, this is my introduction. I'm going to use a lot of imperfect because I'm describing, setting the scene, but now I'm in my body, and now I'm going to list the specific events, okay? And then we'll talk about the conclusion at the end. Okay, chicos, so now we're getting into the body of the story, and we know we're getting into the body of the story because we have, some details. And what's one detail we have here? Eran las 4 de la tarde cuando el examen empezó. Now I'm getting into specifics. What am I saying? Cuando el examen empezó. What's it saying? Yeah, the test started at 4, right? So now I'm getting into a specific detail of the story. And so our verb empezó, we're going to start with that one, is in what tense? Preterite or imperfect? Preterite, exactly. And this verb means what again? To start, which more often than not, if you see empezar, or its antonym, terminar, to start or to finish, and you're choosing between the preterite and the imperfect, it's probably going to be in the preterite. If something ends, class ended at a certain time, or something started, it's probably going to be in the preterite because that's a one-time event. Eran, however, though, is in what tense? Imperfect. Which is weird, because what's this use of...
The ICP sandwich?
Not yet. Hold that thought. See. Eran here is in the imperfect. What are we saying here? Eran las 4. It was 4 o'clock. Okay? So... Oh, actually it is. It is. But...
It's imperfect.
Cuando preterite, sí, señor. And you beat me to it. We'll talk about that here in a second, but I do want to clarify that even though time is awfully specific, we're down to the minutes here, that's pretty specific. Just like age, this is a major exception to the rule. However, it's easy to learn. On the supersite, on the test, if you see the verb ser, and it has to be ser, I repeat, it has to be ser, with a number, it's probably the imperfect because you're stating what time it was, okay? Don't just memorize time. That's not sufficient enough because I could say el examen empezó a las 4. I'm not using ser in that example, so I'm not using the imperfect. It has to be with the verb ser. And then, as Jorge pointed out, this is a cuando sandwich. Cuando sandwich because this is following the pattern that we talked about in class on Wednesday. Imperfect, cuando, preterite. And we'll see some more in this story to help support that consistent sequence of tenses and verbs. Okay, so I'm in the body of my story, and now I'm telling you what happened. And as you can see in the story now, I've got words like primero, luego, después. Primero, me subí al carro. Imperfecto or pretérito? Me subí? Pretérito. Muy bien. Después, prendí el carro con la llave. Imperfecto or pretérito? Pretérito. No? En el carro, el examinador me preguntó, ¿está lista? ¿Imperfecto o pretérito? Pretérito. Muy bien. Y yo le dije sí y empecé a manejar el carro. ¿Pretérito o imperfecto? Pretérito, chicos, ¿por qué? Sequence of events. Primero, luego, después. Whenever we list off, first I did this, then I did that, later I did this, and last I did that. Preterite, 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 preterite. So we want to make sure we put that in our notes. Sequence of events. So when you see those sequencing words, primero, luego, después, you know these are completed actions. I went to the cake party, I did lots of cake stands, I barfed everywhere, I went home. That's a list of actions that were all completed one time in the past last Saturday, for example. And, I use that as an example, not because it's chapter vocab, but it's really that simple. It's really that simple. We talk in the past all the time. What'd you do last weekend? Oh my God, my roommate, blah, blah, blah. And we list the events that took place. And when we do that, we use the preterite tense. Okay? Vamos con otro ejemplo. Conduje por el centro de la ciudad observando los semáforos y la velocidad. Okay, so what's this saying? What am I talking about? ¿Cuál es el infinitivo de conduje? Conducir. No, conducir. We just saw an example previously. Le dije sí, decir, dije. Conducir, conduje. So even though in chapter 9 we didn't have the verb conducir, in chapter 11 we have conducir, just like our verb decir that we saw in chapter 9. So we're going to apply what we know. Tener is an irregular verb in the preterite. Tuve que estudiar anoche. And you might learn the verb mantener, which means to maintain, but it has that root word tener. So in the preterite, we would know mantener would be mantuve, I maintained, or something like that. Conducir, conduje. So don't forget, add this to your list of irregular preterites. And why is this verb in the preterite? What am I talking about here? I did what? I drove through downtown. And let's just recycle some vocab here. Semáforos, what was I doing? I drove downtown and observing what? What are semáforos? ¿Qué son? Stoplights. Muy bien. ¿Y cómo se dice velocidad? Speed limit, right? Or speed, no? Which is easy to remember now because it looks a lot like what word in English? Velocity, which is a fancy physics term for motion. No? Velocidad. Okay, conduje. One-time specific action in the past. Manejaba. Muy bien. Cuando otro carro me pasó rápidamente. Inmediatamente yo puse los frenos. What do we see that's going on here? What am I talking about? What's this saying? I was what? I was driving. When? What happened? Another car passed me quickly. So immediately I slammed on the brakes. In this example, we see what? What is this called? A cuando sandwich. Why? Why is this a cuando sandwich? Because I was driving. Was driving. ING in Spanish. Anytime. And there's a reason why these cuando sandwiches start with the imperfect. Because whenever we want to convey the idea of what you were doing. Yo dormía cuando la alarma sonó. When the alarm went off. I was sleeping. Dormía. I was driving. I was saying. I was studying. I was cooking. We were talking. Whatever was going on, ing is going to use the imperfect. And on the superside, I don't have this in the story today, but on the superside, I know you're going to have this word, mientras. Mientras means while. I was watching TV while he was cooking. Or I was studying while they were working. While connects two ideas in the imperfect, two ideas that are both going on, two ing actions in the past. It's not in the story today, but it's definitely on the super site. Okay, so me pasó rápidamente, inmediatamente puse los frenos, el examinador no estaba contento, estaba emoción imperfecto, ¿no? Otro ejemplo. Después, sequencing word. Tuve que hacer la parte más difícil. Estacionar el carro en paralelo. So then what happened in this story? Tuve que hacer is saying what? What? I did or had to do. Remember, tener plus que plus infinitive expresses obligation. I had to do what? What did I have to do? The most difficult part in the driver's test, which is what?
Parallel parking.
Parallel parking. Which, did y'all have to do that in your driver's test?
Yes.
Okay, some people did not have to. When I asked my students, not everybody has to do this part, but if you're going to live in Charleston, you're going to need to know how to do this. And this is the most challenging part, this most stressful part of the driver's test if you have to. Antes no tenía problemas estacionar en paralelo, pero aquel día tuve un problema malo. Tenemos dos verbos, tenía y tuve. ¿Y cuál es el infinitivo de tenía y tuve? Tener, no? Tener. So we have the same verb being used in two different tenses, two different ways. Tenía is what tense? Actually, this one's imperfect. Remember, ia is imperfect, all about ia. And then tuve would then be what? Preterite. So why am I using in this same sentence tener and the imperfect, and then I switched to the same verb, tener and the preterite? How is that possible? What am I saying here? Antes. ¿Cómo se dice antes? Before, right, exactly. And don't confuse it with después. Después means after. Antes comes before in the alphabet. Before después in the alphabet. Lots of students think antes means after, but antes means before. I'm referring to all this time prior to this driver's test. No tenía problemas estacionar en paralelo, which conveys what idea? Was it just one time I didn't have any problems parallel parking, or repeatedly I did not have problems parallel parking? Repeatedly. So I have to use the imperfect. But then, remember, this whole story is in the past tense, and I say aquel día. So we really have to look at context clues. And aquel día is saying what? Now I'm talking very specific, referencing what? That day, right? That day. I had, a bad problem. So that's why now my verb tener must be in the preterite, because this use is very specific, that one day. Okay, chicos? Bueno, vamos a terminar el resto de esta idea en clase